proclaimed it, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed through his infinite mercy, his child forever I am, redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb, redeemed, 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 his child forever I am, redeemed, so happy in Jesus, no end to my rapture can tell. I know that the light of his presence with me doth continually dwell. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed. His child forever I am. I know I shall see in his beauty the King whose law I delight, who lovingly guarded my footsteps and giveth me songs in the night. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed by the blood of the Lamb. Redeemed, redeemed, redeemed. His child and forever I am.
I don't know. Can't remember. But it is good to see you. I want to thank Brother Tommy for the invite. He called me earlier and said, Rick, you know today is the day. I was like, no, I didn't know today was today. Okay. I'll speak a little louder. I'll try to. I hear you. I hear you. It's funny that happened. My wife is always saying, every time I speak to her, she leans in. I'm like, am I really talking that soft? I don't know. You know, but that's okay. But we're doing grace and redemption. And so I thought what I would do is pull something from the book of Ruth, and we are just really going to go through probably the first 2 chapters. I hope there's something in there that will bless your life. Nothing innovative, new, nothing that we haven't heard before. But when we think about redemption, we think about to purchase back, to buy back. And God had made provisions for his people in the book, as we go through Ruth, that if you fell on hard times, if a family fell on hard times, then your husband could put himself out as an indentured servant so that he can keep the family farm. And if things got really bad, then the wife may have to pitch in, or the kids may have to pitch in. And if things continue to get worse, if he didn't have someone that could pull him out of his situation, then a near kinsman could come and could redeem him and get the family farm back, so to speak. He could have also waited until the year of Jubilee. In the year of Jubilee, there's a cancellation of debts, and so all debts are made clean. But if you had fallen on hard times right after the year of Jubilee, waiting 50 years would be a long time to try to recover. So we're looking at this story, and it kind of incorporates that, and so you kind of want to bear that in mind. And there's another law, and we're looking at Leviticus 25. You can read 47 through 50. But there's another law that we need to be mindful of, but it's the Levirate law, marriage law, and it's found in Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 10. And that law basically talks about that if a man has a wife and he passes and they don't have children, then the next brother in line would take her on as the spouse to raise up seed for the deceased brother. And that way, that family line would continue to go on. And so we see that in the book of Ruth as we go through that. And so these are some of the things that are in the background as we kind of go through this story. It says, now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was famine in the land, and a certain man from Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. The question is, why is there a famine in the land? It's a question that we have to ask. Bethlehem in Judah, we think of the house of bread and a place of praise. And when we think of God's house, there should always be praise in God's house, amen? There should always be bread in God's house. And I'm pretty sure you guys are getting a good feeding here, but the situation was that there was famine in the land, and so he goes to the land of Moab. And in Psalms 108, Moab by David is called a wash pot. David calls it a wash pot. So it's not a place that had a lot of, I'll just say, a good reputation, so to speak. And we know who the Moabites are. Those are actually Lot's kinfolks, right? Moab and Ammon, Moabites, Ammonites. And so that's who they are. And so here there was no bread, and they're going into the land of Moab. And so in verse 2, it says, and the name of the man was named Elimelech, which means my God is king. And the name of his wife was Naomi, which means pleasant. And the name of his sons were Mahlon, which means sickly, and Chilion, which means pining, Ephrathites of Bethlehem, Judah. And they came into the country of Moab, which is of my father, or of his father, and they continued there. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, so that she was left alone with her 2 sons. And they took them wives and of the women of Moab. The name of one was Orpah, which is gazelle, and the name of the other was Ruth, which means friend. And they dwelt there for about 10 years. And so here we have it. Naomi's husband dies, and so the sons are taking on Moabite women for wives. And as we talk about relationships, sometimes we're going to have some people that's going to display acts to us, what I'm going to call acts of friendship. And then there are other people as we think about God's grace and redemption, when things get a little tough, they may run like a gazelle. And so you have these situations to consider. One thing that we want to examine is how, as we see Ruth in this story, how she handles herself during the time of a crisis. And that's a question that we have to ask ourselves, is sometimes when we feel like we're not being fed in God's house, sometimes when we feel like we're not getting the praise or the uplifting that we need in God's house, how do we handle ourselves? Do we run from the situation like a gazelle, or do we have the strong backbone that shows signs of a good friend? In verse 4 of chapter 1, it says, these took Moabite wives, and the name, and I think I named them already. The name was, one was Orpah, and the other one, of course, is Ruth. And, of course, they were there for about 10 years. In verse number 5, it says, and Mahlon and Chilion died, also both of them, and the woman was left of her 2 sons and her husband. Then she arose with her husband-in-law that she might return from the country of Moab, for she had heard, this is Naomi, she had heard in the country of Moab how that the Lord had visited his people in giving them bread. And so here we have it that Naomi hears, she's in a foreign land, and she hears that the Lord has visited his people. And that's a blessing. I think we all want to be in a place where we feel like God is visiting his people. Wherefore, she went forth out of the place where she was, her and her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way, and they returned into the land of Judah. And Naomi said unto her 2 daughters, she says, go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, and as ye have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant you that ye may find rest. And notice what she's saying in these words. These words are powerful. That you may find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband. And hopefully in our house, there is peace and there is rest. We can't really say that about every home. Sometimes there is no peace. When you're out in the world, when you come home, sometimes you want to find some peace and you want to find some rest. The Lord grant you that you find rest, each of you, in the house of her husband. Then she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said unto her, surely we will return with thee unto thy people. And Naomi said, turn again, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there yet any more sons in my womb that ye may be your husband? Turn again, my daughters. Go away, for I am too old to have a husband. And what she is saying is that there is no opportunity for you if you continue with me. There's nothing to look beyond me for. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband also tonight, and should also bear sons, would you tarry for them till they were grown? Would you stay for them would you stay for them from having husbands? May my daughters, for it grieveth me much for your sake, that the hand of the Lord is gone out from against me. Now, when we think of Naomi, her name means pleasant, right? And here it is, she leaves a place of praise, a place where there's bread, and now life is turning against her, right? And one thing Naomi is speaking to, she's speaking to this law that I mentioned in Deuteronomy 25 when she talks about, I'm old, even if I had a son, are you going to wait, until they're grown? But that's kind of in the background here. Then they lifted up their voices in verse 14, and they wept again. And Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. What does it mean to cleave to someone? What does that mean? It means to run hard after, In Genesis, we are told to cleave unto our wives. You know, we're supposed to run hard after them. Some of them like to be chased, by the way, but nonetheless, we're supposed to run hard after them, and we're supposed to cleave unto them. And so here we have it in verse 16. It says, "But Ruth said, 'Do not urge me to leave you or return from following you.' And of course, we've heard this so many times, 'For where you go, I go, and where you lodge, I will lodge.' She says, 'For your people shall be my people, and your God shall be my God.'" What a statement. And this is a commitment that we should all have, despite when we think about God's grace and God's mercy, his hand as we think about redemption. She says, "But your people," she says, "they will be my people, and your God will be my God." So Ruth tried to run her off, but Naomi just wasn't having it. She says, "Where thou diest," she says, "I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part me and thee." And when she saw that she was steadfast-minded to go with her, then she left off speaking unto her. In other words, she was convinced in her own mind that this lady's mind was made up. And church, I wish I could say that we all have. I know I'm talking to the choir, if you will, the dedicated group, And it would be nice that if we all had a mind that was made up like that. COVID has showed us a lot of things. It has showed us that a lot of our brethren that we thought were with us weren't with us. Their minds truly weren't made up. And it's almost like as if the church has to go out and to re-evangelize all over again just to get the fold to come back. But here we see this commitment. 19, it says, "And so they went until they came into Bethlehem, and it came to pass that when they would come to Bethlehem, that all the city was moved about them, and they said, 'Is this Naomi?'" From the very fact that it says that they were moved and, they said, "Is this Naomi?" One day you're looking fabulous. You're looking marvelous. You got it all together. But life happens. Things get in the way. Things get turned around. And here she's coming back, and it's very obvious from what they're looking at that there has been a big change. "Is this Naomi?" And she said unto them, "Call me not pleasant. Don't call me pleasant. Don't call me Naomi. Call me Mara, or call me bitter." She says, "For the Almighty have dealt very bitterly with me." She says, "I went out full, and the Lord hath brought me home again empty." Very powerful. Sometimes, church, as we think about redemption, as we think about God's grace, sometimes we are full. Life is full. Everything is full. Do you need anything? I don't need. I have all I need. I cannot ask for anything more. But then life has a way of dealing with us where it looks like we're on E. You feel like you're on empty. And so here she says, "Call me bitter, because I went out full, but the Lord hath brought me back empty. Why call ye me Naomi, seeing that the Lord has testified against me, and that the Almighty has afflicted me?" So Naomi is saying, don't call me pleasant. She says, call me bitter. She says that the Lord is testifying against her. Normally I would ask you these questions, but I'm going to answer them myself this time. So it's like I'm talking to myself. for time's sake. I'm trying to get through as much as this as I can. The word testify means to bear witnesses. It also means to be broken. And sometimes, church, we go out and sometimes we do come back broken. That's part of life. And we heard it said by others and so many, what doesn't break you, you can speak, it's okay. It makes you stronger. Yeah, it makes you stronger. And Naomi went out full, but she came back broken. Some relationships have to be broken in order for them to become greater, right? Sometimes in the thought process, we are seeing things one way, but until we get to the point where we're allowed to see ourselves to be broken, we cannot get to the next plateau. Notice the words in Jeremiah 18:6. It says, O house of Israel, can I not do with you as the potter, saith the Lord? Behold, as the clay is in the potter's hand, so are ye in my hand, O house of Israel. And so here we have it in Jeremiah. God is saying, I can do with you as I please. And I think it's okay to ask why, but it's for us to understand it, really, and see God's blessings in it. 22, and so Naomi returned, and Ruth, the Moabite, her daughter-in-law, with her, who returned from the country of Moab, and they came to Bethlehem at the beginning of the harvest. I find it so interesting that it just so happened to be at the beginning of the harvest. I don't see a clock. And I'm going to take my phone out. I don't want to be up here until midnight and y'all be like, Oh, it's a bell. There you go. Forgot. Right. And Naomi had a kinsman of her husband, a mighty man, a wealthy man of the family of Elimelech, and his name was Boaz. Boaz means strong, mighty. When we think of this Redeemer, you cannot help but think of Christ, the great Redeemer, right? The man that is mighty, the man that is wealthy, the God that is strong. In Solomon's porch, there were 2 erected pillars. They're about 18 cubits high, and they were named after him. They were named Boaz. And so the story takes place in the time of the Judges. In Judges 21:25, it says, "And Israel had no king, and every man did what was right in his own eyes." And it almost sounds like today. I just heard you mention that gangs are starting to be more prevalent in the community here, and that's sad to hear. And Ruth the Moabite, chapter 2, verse 2, said to Naomi, she says, "Let me go to the field and glean." Now remember, Ruth stayed, but the gazelle went away, right? She took off. And so here she says, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." And so she went and she came and she gleaned in the field after the reapers. And it just so happened she was to light on part of the field that belonged to Boaz, who was of the kindred of Elimelech. It just so happened, out of all of the fields, she just so happened to come and to be in the field where there's a near kinsman. Is that God's grace? I think so. Divine providence, whatever you want to call it. Gleaning was a provision that was set up in Deuteronomy 24:17 and 22, that if a person, as I explained, fell on hard times, he could work the field. They could work on the edges of the field to support themselves. It was more like a welfare system. You could think of it that way. He could support himself or herself. The Israelites were not to go over the second time, and so as they gleaned the field, they weren't to get every nook and cranny. They were to leave some behind for someone who did fall on hard times. And of course, this was God's plan for taking care of the needy. 2 Thessalonians 3:10. Ruth offers to go to support the family by working in the field. What was her faith at the time? These are questions that I'm asking you, but I'm just saying them to myself. The question that she asked was that she might find grace and that she might find acceptance. Remember, she's a Moabite woman in Deuteronomy 2:9. Israel was not to bother with the people of Moab. As a matter of fact, I think they were not allowed to come into God's house. I can't remember for how long, but I believe that is the case. Ruth did not know Boaz, but it just so happened that she ends up in his field. And so, as we said earlier, we see God's grace, his providence at work in this story. And one of the questions that I was asking here is, do you think Ruth went into the field looking for her future husband, which would be a kinsman redeemer? That's just for consideration. And behold, Boaz, he came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered him, "The Lord bless thee." Now, can you imagine going to work? "The Lord be with you. The Lord bless thee." You don't talk to your employer like that, do you? "May the Lord bless you." No. But I find it very interesting that here this man named Boaz, who was strong and who was mighty, he comes and he has this relationship with those that are working in the field. Then said Boaz unto the servant that was set over the reapers, "Who's the damsel? Whose damsel is this?" And the servant that was set over the reapers answered and said, "It is the Moabitish damsel that came back with Naomi out of the country of Moab." And she said, "I pray you, let me glean and gather after the reapers among the sheaves." And so she came and hath continued even from the morning until now, that she tarried a little in the house. And so here it is that this young woman, Ruth, from sun up to sundown, she's getting it in. She's working. And she only took out a little time for a little break. And that's noticed by this servant that's over the reapers. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter, do not glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women, and let thy eyes be on the field that they do reap, and go thou after them. Have I not charged the young men that they should not touch thee? And when thou art athirst, go unto the vessels and drink of that which the young men have drawn." Notice the provision, the grace that God is providing in this story. So what does Boaz come to do? Boaz, he came to do an inspection. And how does Boaz greet them? We spoke about it. "My Lord be with you." And they respond back, "May the Lord bless thee." And so we see this great deal of respect as they answered back to him. And Boaz asked Ruth, "Who was this young woman that's in my field?" I thought that was very interesting. That to me, in my mind, it's just a large number of people. And how did he spot her? I have no idea. Um, and he says, the servant, how did this, the question that I had was asking, and I'm going to answer it, but the servant basically describes her as a hard worker, right? He describes her as a hard worker. How does Boaz address her? What does he call her? Now you can say something. My daughter. Don't you just love that? It's very endearing. I'll tell you, and this is not part of the thing here, but it's very endearing to me. Like when I was younger, I was reading the book of Proverbs. This is where I really connected with the book. And I kept hearing this word, my son, my son. And that broke through. And so when I hear him say my daughter, it's like I can hear the Lord in the book of Proverbs saying, my son, and giving me the advice, right? Very powerful to me. What advice does he give Ruth? He says to stay in the field and by my maidens. And what did Boaz offer Ruth? He offered her provision and protection. This is God's grace. The question is, what would God say about me if I was in this story? In verse 10, she says, then she fell on her face and she bowed herself to the ground and she said unto him, why have I found grace in thy eyes that thou should have taken knowledge of me, seeing I'm a stranger? And Boaz answered and he said unto her, it has fully been showed me all that thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law since the death of thine husband. I want to pause from there because I think that's just so powerful that her relationship with the mother-in-law. We know how the mother-in-law thing goes, right? I've heard enough stories about that. But it just goes to show you how, in such a high esteem, that Boaz is looking at her. He says, I've heard. In other words, your reputation is preceding you. So should it be said about us. Our reputation should be preceding us so that people can say, well, I have heard about you, right? I'm on verse 14, right? And Boaz said unto her, let me back up. Thank you. I lost my place. I was getting too excited up here. So 13. So I had some questions. It says, what were the qualities that Boaz found attractive in Ruth? Think about that. Dedication to the mother-in-law, her acts of kindness, basic moral qualities. In verse 13, he says, then she said, let me find favor in thy sight, my Lord, for thou hast comforted me, and for thou hast spoken friendly unto thy handmaid, that I be not like unto, friendly unto me, thy handmaid, though I be not like unto thy maidens. And Boaz said unto her, at mealtime, come thou hither and eat of the bread, and dip thy morsel in the vinegar. And she sat beside the reapers, and he reached her parched corn, and she did eat, and was sufficed and left. This shows intimacy to me. To sit down and have a meal is a sign of intimacy, a sign of caring. Normally we invite people over to dinner that we want to either get to know or someone that we want to bond with. Lord forbid that we stop cooking around in the kitchen table. I know we like to go out and eat all the time, but Hopefully, we're still breaking bread around the table because that's the time for these, conversations, so to speak. So, what else did Boaz offer Ruth? He offered for her to come and to dine. Ruth did sit in verse 14. Boaz did eat with her, and Jesus said in Revelation 3:20 that he would sup with us. Verse 15. It says, and when she had risen up to glean, Boaz commanded his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves, and reproach her not. And let fall also of the handfuls of purpose for her, and leave them that she may glean them, and rebuke her not. And so here it is. God is really blessing Ruth. Just so happened, just let some purpose fall. Sometimes, it's wonderful when these things happen to us, when there's just purpose. God just put extra blessings out. And that's what she was getting. It's one thing for her to go and glean the field. She's getting what she can. But just so happened, Boaz is setting it up. Let some handfuls of purpose fall, and do not rebuke her. So this is another act of kindness that we see provisions being made. And I wonder if Ruth knew when she was picking up, when she was gleaning, that she was being provided for. I appreciate the brother prayer when he spoke about answered prayers. Because sometimes we don't give God thanks, we don't give him glory when he answers the prayer. Sometimes we are picking up hands full of purpose, and it just goes right over your head, or my head. Maybe it's just me. It just goes over my head. Sometimes I miss it. But we need to look up and realize from where all of our blessings are really coming from. It's just God looking out for us. Some things, they just fall right in line, and you just couldn't ask for anything more. "17. And so she gleaned in the field until even, and she beat out that she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. And she took it up, and she went into the city, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. And she brought it forth, and she gave it to her that she reserved after she was sufficed. And her mother-in-law said unto her, where hast thou gleaned today? It was evident. Naomi knows what you normally come back when you're gleaning off of the floor. And she says, child, I can see it now. Where have you been today? Right? And so she sees that. And where wroughtest thou? Blessed be he that did take knowledge of thee. And she showed her mother-in-law with whom she had wrought, and said, the man's name with whom I wrought today is Boaz. And Naomi hit the floor. No, it didn't say that, but that's about what would have happened to me, right? And Naomi said unto her daughter-in-law, blessed be the Lord, who have not left off his kindness to the living and to the dead. And what she is speaking about is she's speaking about these laws that are in place, that are designed to keep the family going. And Naomi said unto her, the man is a near kinsman, or he is near of kin unto me. He's one of our next kinsmen. And so the questions are, what did Ruth bring to her mother? She brought about 9 gallons of leftover, which is a lot. What did Naomi say when she saw it? We kind of just touched on that. When Naomi heard that Ruth was in Boaz's field, what did she say? right? She says he's a near kinsman. These are questions that I would normally ask. So does it appear that God was working things out for Naomi? Naomi said that God had brought her back empty, broken, and the question that I had written down was, does it look like God is looking out for Naomi? And I like the fact that Naomi claimed that God did not cut her off. Church, God forbid that we should ever feel like we've been cut off. 21. And Ruth the Moabite said, besides, he said to me, you shall keep close by my young men until they have finished all my harvest. Did Boaz say that? Boaz didn't say that. He didn't tell her to keep by the young men. He said, stay with the women, the maidens. See, she was getting a little too excited. She was getting a little too excited. God is being good to her and blessing her, and she's taking it a little bit further than what was given to her. Now notice what Ruth says, and we can see the wisdom in Ruth and Naomi. And Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that you go with the young women, lest in another field you be assaulted, right? She knows what happens in these fields when you're working. She knows what's out there. So the questions are, what advice did Naomi give Ruth? What type of woman does Ruth appear to be? I have modest, industrious, good-natured person. Do you think these qualities attracted Boaz? Despite the fact, these are questions, despite the fact that Ruth's life appeared to be uncomfortable, did she follow the Lord fully is a question. Was it dangerous for her to go out working in the field without protection? Another question. Did she sustain any injuries? You know, when I was young, I had to pause for this. When I was younger, my friend, his father was a preacher, a Baptist preacher. And so, we were together a lot. And I like being around older people for some reason. Don't ask me why. I'm a young man. Why do I like being around older people? I don't know. All right, so I got 5 minutes, right? So I used to drive his mom around, right? Because she would let me have the car. I didn't have a car back then. That was the handfuls of purpose. See, God be letting out handfuls of purpose. I'm a young teenage man, right? And so he gets the car, my friend gets the car, and of course we drive around, but it's no big thing to him. He doesn't look up and see the blessings. And so one thing I noticed about her, every time I drove somewhere, she was like, thank you, Jesus. We come home, thank you, Jesus. I was like, if this lady say, thank you, Jesus, one more time, I'm going to scream. But it wasn't until I got older and I started driving. Then I came home and I was saying, thank you, Jesus. So you learn. These are just some things you have to learn. When I was coming up here, there were at least 2 accidents. And, the only thing we could do is just thank the Lord and just kind of keep it moving. All right, so we talked about the advice that Ruth gave. We talked about what type of woman does she appear to be. In Proverbs 3 and 6, and I think I'm gonna just try to wrap this up here, because this is a beautiful story, and it's just so many fine points to make as we consider God's grace, His mercy, in this whole redemption process, because we're not going to be able to get to the story of Boaz doing this redemption. But I'm going to just end it here. It says, acknowledge him in all thy ways, and he will direct thy steps. Proverbs 3, 6. And in Proverbs 3 and 5, we are also told to trust in the Lord with our whole heart, and we're not to lean not on our own understanding. Church, just know, no matter what it is, God is always working it out. Even when you don't know that he's working it out, he's working it out. And with that, I will call it my time.